My name is John Passfield, and I'm going to read from my novel, Pauline Johnson, Know Who I Am. The title of this reading will be Pauline Johnson, Video 6, Pauline's Mother and Father. Here's the cover of the novel, Pauline Johnson, Know Who I Am, a novel by John Passfield, a photograph of Pauline Johnson on the cover, the historical Pauline Johnson. Pauline Johnson was born on the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, Canada. Was she American, British, or Canadian? Was she Mohawk, English, or mixed? She added up her assets and liabilities and decided that the Pauline the world would see would be Pauline the performance artist, Pauline on stage. As for the real Pauline, she would keep that to herself. Here's a note on terminology, which I printed in the back of the title page. Such terms as First Nations, Aboriginal, Indigenous were not in common usage at the time at which the events of the novel take place. To refer to her mother's people, the historical Pauline Johnson used the terms English and white. To refer to her father's people, she used the terms Indian, Mohawk, and red. While the novel is fiction, I've used Pauline Johnson's terms throughout the novel in the interest of historical accuracy. Some stories strike us as no more than entertainment. We enjoy them for the moment and then pass on. Other stories have a resonance that makes them become significant imagery in our minds. On page 93 of this novel, the main character, Pauline Johnson, thinks of a story, one of many she has written over the course of a long career as a professional writer. She thinks, I wrote a short story, and I called it My Mother. It's based on my mother and father, on the actual life they lived, boiled down from the sap in the pail, if you see what I mean. Two people together, two people apart, a world they share, a world they do not share. The two apart, the two together, then one alone. So what is this story saying? 50 pages, a few thousand words? What is it saying to every reader who turns the page? Imagery comments on other imagery. Imagery enhances the meaning of other imagery. Imagery subverts and undermines the meaning of other imagery. Imagery modifies and makes more pertinent the meaning of other imagery. When this story, the story of her mother and her father, becomes significant imagery in the mind of the main character, it takes on the role of commenting on the other imagery of the main character's entire life. The story is placed by the main character as imagery in 7 thought chapters of the novel. I will read parts of all 7, just to give you a sense of the story as she tells it, as she thinks it in her mind. Chapter 3, page 24 is where we'll start. Here we are. George was a young Indian lad. He was a Mohawk brave in his prime. He was an interpreter for the missionaries on the Six Nations Reserve. George spoke English and the Indian languages, 8 languages in all. He served on the Six Nations Council. While still a very young man, he became an Indian chief. George worked hard and saved his money. One day he bought a large estate. He picked a spot above the Grand River and staked out a house. Then we go to page 26. Life at home was intolerable for Lydia and her sisters. Their father beat his children mercilessly. In one hand a Bible, in the other hand a rod. Lydia's older sister had an offer to marry an older man. He was a minister who was going to move to Canada. Should she marry an older man and move away? Would Lydia be willing to go to Canada with her sister? They had heard that the northern country was still quite wild. The husband was going to work among Indians in the bush. Then we move on to page 38. George was a young Mohawk man who acted as an interpreter between the Indians and the missionaries. Lydia was the younger sister. She had come to Canada with her married sister and brother-in-law. Her role was to help with the children and the chores. There was admiration from the first meeting, She was the best of the English nation. He was the best of the Mohawk tribe. And then from 38, we move to page 40. There was tension on the reserve. George was a government interpreter, acting as go-between for Indian and white. He was in line due to heredity to take his place on the council of the reserve. Some objected that George should not be allowed 2 roles, but George's mother was chief matron and could appoint any male to a vacant spot on council. She threatened to leave one Mohawk council seat vacant. There would be one less Mohawk vote on the council of the reserve. George was a young man on the rise. He was respected by Indian and white. Despite objections, he was allowed to serve 2 roles. So from 40, we go to 41, 42. 7 years went by. George was sure he was falling in love. He did his job and loved the girl from afar. Lydia grew to admire George. He was handsome, intelligent, kind. He was the person she grew to love. They saw each other every day. They never spoke of their growing love. Each wondered what the other one would say. So then we go from that, which is page 42, to page 54. Again, these thoughts of her mom and dad, her mother and father, are interlayered with thoughts of her own life, all of the elements of her life that she's rethinking now that she's an older person and living in Vancouver. George's parents arranged a marriage with an attractive Mohawk girl. This was designed to keep the bloodline pure. George refused the arranged marriage. He had other plans instead. He told his parents that he wanted the freedom to choose on his own. George left his parents' home. He went to see the English girl. He asked the English girl if she would be willing to marry him. So from page 54 to page 56. George's parents were shocked and wounded. How could he stoop to marry a white? How could he let the bloodline be sullied by foreign blood? Now his children would not be royal. They would not have pure Mohawk blood. His children and children's children could never be chief. Thousands of years of Mohawk pride. Thousands of years of blood and of bone. George was shocked that his parents had been so hurt. So from there we go to page 58. Lydia's younger sister was completely against the marriage. This was a sister whom she had hardly known. She had married a minister and moved to Toronto. The sister implored, the sister entreated, the sister sneered, ridiculed, stormed. Marry an Indian? How could you? Think of your children and the lives that they will lead. The sister's husband refused to discuss the matter. He ordered Lydia out of the house. Not another night will you spend beneath this roof. So then we go to page 70 to pick up the story in Pauline Johnson's thoughts. These were the golden days of August. They met in Toronto, and they were wed. An army major and his wife gave them shelter and love. George's dream had now come true. He was marrying his own true love. Lydia's dream had now come true. She was marrying her own true love. They were perfect for each other. The minister pronounced them man and wife. And then we go to page 72. Steaming along the lake from Toronto, they were ecstatic to reach their new home. This was the grand estate that George had dreamed and had made. A silver tea service and a new piano, the hills, the woods, the river, the majestic elms, the sturdy oaks, the regal pines, the brilliant leaves in the flush of late August, the flats on the river, the terraced lawns, the smell of smoke from the clearing of the land. They were sure they had left their yesterdays behind. And then page 74. A son was born to George and Lydia. No grandparents attended their birth. There was resentment on both sides of the racial divide. The boy was the best of both the races. He was the best of both the worlds. A child of the future, but not of the past. All the best features of two great races. A double heart in this beautiful child. His eyes gave hints of Indian forest and English skies. So then we go over to page 86. Again, leaving out a lot of thoughts of Pauline Johnson. The whiskey trade was booming on the reserve. A quart of whiskey for a cord of firewood. A keg of whiskey in return for a winter's wood. Bible in one hand, bottle in the other. People laughed and called it firewater, but the menace grew and grew. The whiskey trade grew to become a dreaded scourge. George was made a government warden. His task was to stop the whiskey trade, and when caught buying illegal timber, was jailed or fined. So from there we go to page 88. Marshes, miasmas, raging fever. The swamp fever had George in its claws. Lydia nursed her husband as best she could. Then a firm knock at the door. Two elderly people stood on the porch. Lydia spoke only English. George's mother spoke only Mohawk. George's mother gave George's baby moccasin. The gulf was bridged at last. Gradually, the fever eased its claws. Then to the next page. Two mothers who never spoke, communicated all the same, shared the love of the children and the husband's son. What is English? What is Mohawk? They are but languages of the heart. They shared the best of their mutual world. A boy, a girl, another boy, another girl. Mother hens who took good care of the growing brood. Well, the second girl is Pauline Johnson, the main character of this novel. Then we go to page 101. Here we are. The children were Indian and English, learned the legends and lore of both. Two contributory streams. Their mother was English, their father was Mohawk. The children saw the two as one, a blended future, like the waters of the Grand. Love of trees, the river, birds, love of church, flag, queen, love of music, china, animals, and books. And then page 104. 30 years, and there was sunshine. George and Lydia were so in love. There was love and there was kindness on their estate. Skating on the river in winter, swimming all summer long, the children would paddle their canoes and play croquet. There was a ceremony in Brantford. George was dressed in his Mohawk garb. The prince penned a medal on George's chest. So from there we go to page 106. 30 years, and there were shadows. The whiskey traders were threatening George. They sent him letters telling him what they were going to do. We'll maim your horses and cows in the fields. We'll burn down your house and set fire to your barn. There's a bullet with your name that's waiting for you. The children never knew. They lived in a bubble of sunshine and cheer. But his wife would always wonder if he would survive. And then we go to the final chapter of this story. Page 117, I'll just find. They caught up with George one day. They caught him when he was alone. 6 men surrounded George and beat him down. Broken hand, 3 broken ribs, some broken teeth. Cracked his skull with a heavy weight. Dragged his body into the road and left him to die. George woke up in a pool of his own blood. Got himself up and managed to stagger along the road. Lydia came to see what was scratching at the door. And then page 120. Here we are. George was unable to continue his crusade. He wanted to stop the whiskey trade, but crippling injuries had forced him to slow down. George grew old and he grew ill. Lydia nursed him as best she could. They had caught him at his height and brought him down. The estate flourished, but the life had somehow gone. The children grew up and began to leave home. George went to sleep and didn't wake up again. And then the girl was sitting and talking with her mother. She told her mother that she was going to leave their home. She said that she was going to be a poet. She would take a tour of every major city. She would tour and recite her poems from the stage. Vast audiences would flock to hear what she had to say. She told her mother that she intended to be famous. She would publish her poems in a whole series of books. Who knows, she told her mother. Perhaps she would get to go to London and recite for the Queen. Well, that's on page 122, and it's Pauline Johnson, of course, the daughter of George, and Lydia, the fictional name in her short story. And from page 122, that takes us back to basically page 1 in the novel, where she's beginning her career as a poet who hopes to be famous. It's a story of race-based thinking, of prejudice on both sides. How could you, George, think of marrying a non-Mohawk? How could you, Lydia, think of marrying a non-white? It's a story of greed. The whiskey traders were both Aboriginal and white. Money to them was more important than the ties of humanity and of blood. It's a story of parents and children of going against parental wishes in order to seek the fulfillment of the potential of the self. But it's also a story of reconciliation, though not completely, as only one set of parents and child reach an accord. It's a story of hard work and perseverance, of the establishing of a family, of inside harmony and outside forces that are destructive and strike George down. About the breaking up of the family as the generations pass, of how everyone faces life in similar ways. It's also a story of a time and a place, a story which captures the early activities of the people who inherit the region in which I, along with my family, have made my home. It's a beautiful and highly complex story. An Aboriginal story, a non-Aboriginal story, an Ontario story, a Canadian story, a universal story which would make sense when read in any country and at any historical time. I have retold it in this novel, but in its original version it deserves to be better known. Canada is still a young country, still searching for the significant imagery of its history. This is a mature and complex story. It deserves to take its place in the popular culture. Someday, I'm sure, a movie or a TV series will come to be made. Well, the novel is Pauline Johnson, Know Who I Am, a novel by John Passfield. It's available on Amazon. More information there. It's available on my publisher's website, rocksmillspress.com, ROCKSMILLSPRSS.com, and then on my website, johnpassfield.ca, JOHNPASSFIELD.ca, 2 free books. A planning notebook showing how I conceived of and wrote the novel, free access just by clicking on the icon on the website, and a journal which contained my reflections on the rough draft that I was polishing for a month or 6 weeks. So have a look at johnpassfield.ca if you want to have a look for free at those 2 books. Lastly, I'll just say thank you for watching this video.